For practice it exercise 6.11 wordWrap3, we are asked to modify the preceding wordWrap method into a new method that wraps only whole words. So if we go back to 6.9 wordWrap, we can see that we would just wrap at the end of the 60th character, no matter if it was in the middle of the word or if it was at the end of a word. But for wordWrap3, it wants us to wrap it at the very end of the word. But instead of ending it there, it wants us to actually have that word and move it onto the next line. So we're going to write our code like this. It's not going to be like 6.10. This is where we output it to a file. So we're not using this as a basis, but we can use 6.9 as sort of a basis. However, our code's actually going to be much different from 6.9. We'll compare it afterwards. So we're going to start here by making our method. It's going to be a public static void, because it's not returning anything, called wordWrap3. And in here, we are going to take a scanner as our parameter, where we scan through the file, and our parameter, or our file, is just going to be called input. We'll have a bracket so we can write inside of our method. And we want to run this as long as we have lines in our file. So we'll do while input dot has next line, and then we will close these brackets so we can write inside of our while loop. So in here, unlike our previous one where we wanted to just keep running this, we have to check where our characters stop for the specific line. And since we have to check this, we need to use an if statement inside of our while loop. So the only thing that's going to change really is some of this and some of this. We still need our while loop to check if it is greater than 60, and it's going to run as long as our line is greater than 60. To check if our line is greater than 60, we need to store our line in something. So we will do string line, and we'll set that equal to input.next line. That way we get this line and we store it. Next thing that we're going to do is use a while loop. And in our while loop, we are going to run it as long as our line.length is greater than 60. And then we'll just manipulate our line.length. So we'll have line.length, and it's going to run as long as it's greater than 60. We can close these brackets and start writing in this while loop. As I mentioned previously, we need to use conditions. And to use conditions, we'll use if and else if statements. So in here, we'll have our first if statement. And we want to check if the character at the end of our string, or at the end of our current line, is a space or not. Because if it is a space or a white line, then there's no word. So we can just print out everything. Later, we're going to have an else if statement. And in our else if statement, we need to check if there is not a white space. So if there is not a white space, it would be in our else if statement. And in our else if statement, we are just going to change this here so we can move the word to the next line. So if we have our if statement, we're going to have line dot, since we're checking the character at our 60th index, we're just going to use charAt, and we can say 60. And I said we want to check if it's a white space or not. If it's a white space, we're just going to be in our if statement, so we can have these two single quotes like this. Basically, we're saying if line dot charAt 60, so if the character in our line at index 60 is equal to a space, we are just going to print out our line from 0 to 60. So we're going to have a sysout where we will have a substring in here because we only want to get that specific 60, because there could be more than just 60 in this line. So we'll do line.substring, and in our line.substring, we're going to have it go from 0 or index 0 to 60. We're going to end this line, and now we actually have to manipulate our line.length. And this is really easy, actually. This is easier than the last one, because after we've printed out this substring right here, all we need to do is set our line equal to a new substring. And this new substring is going to start at our 60th index, and it's just going to take everything from there. So we'll do line.substring, and in here we'll write 60. Since we just have a starting index, we are going to keep this character at this index and everything after that. If we have two parameters in here, we're only going to keep the characters in between them. I have a video on how to use substrings that'll be below, and it explains more about how to work with substrings. So after we have this, if our if statement were to continuously execute, we would print out this line of characters, and then we would make our line equal to the substring starting at the 60th index. So now our index would be whatever is at the 60th index. However, we do need to change this line. So we are comparing line.character at 60 equal to a space. But if there's a space here, we don't want to print out a space in our next line. So instead of doing 60, we'll just do 60 plus 1. So it'll be 60 and then an extra 1 to account for this white space, because we are going to have a white space if we're in this if statement, and this will just go over that white space. Now we're going to go into our else if statement, and we're running this else if. We can actually just call it else, but I like to have else ifs. That way I actually know what the parameters are. So we'll do line.character at basically the same thing for our if statement. We have line.character at 60, and we're going to say it does not equal 0, or it does not equal a space. If it does not equal a space, it's going to be in our else if statement. So in here, we need to basically print out our string, and we are going to run it to the last time we see a space. After we see the space, we're going to move to a next line. So we'll do system.out.print line, and in here we need to have our line.substring, and in our substring we are going to have the index 0, and we are going to have it have a substring, so a substring inside of a substring. And this might be easier if we declare it outside. So we'll have a int, and we'll call it last, because it's going to be the last space, and we'll set it equal to a line.substring. And in this substring, we're going from 0 to 60, but afterwards we're going to do dot lastIndexOf, and we have a space in here. Then I'll also have a video on the lastIndexOf below as well. So this line, it's super key. What we're doing here is we're basically getting the substring from 0 to 60, and we're locking that in. But we are only taking 0 to the last index of this space. So initially we are taking the string from 0 to 60, and then when we have this call right afterwards, we are looking at the entire string, and once it hits a space, wherever the last index of the space is, it's going to cap it there. So if we have 0 to 60, but our last white space is at the index 57, this last index of is going to make this last from 0 to 57. So it's going to store 57, because it gets this substring, right, from 0 to 60, and then this last index of basically looks over the string again, and it reports the index of the last time this white space is. So again, if we had a white space on index 57, this whole thing would just return 57. So 57 would be stored in last. And then we're going to run this from 0 to 57. Or last, because 57 was just used for this example. So this runs from 0 to last. And then after we do this, we need to change our line, just like we did in this if statement. It's going to be basically the same thing, where we have line But instead of just being 60 plus 1, we have to change this because we our last index is dependent on this last int. So we're going to do line.substring, and we are going to do last plus 1. We need a plus 1 so it moves on to the next value, because after we have this last part, we're going to have a space. So we're going to skip over a space and print that out. Again, because our last defines the last time, or the last character this print line prints out, we need to start from that last character and then the next one, so we don't print out a space. Add semicolons here. Once we have this all in order, we can break out of our else if statement. We're going to eventually break out of our loop. And when our line.length is not greater than 0, we are just going to have a system.out.print line, where we just print out the rest of the line. After we have this, we can submit it, and we can see that we have passed all of the tests. So this is the code for this problem. It's a little bit confusing, but again, the line.substring is below, and also more on .lastIndexOf is below, that go a little bit further in depth on what these do. So this is the code for this exercise.